All right, folks. I think we're live. Firstly, appreciate all the people on the webinar attending today. I'm very much looking forward to this one. If you ask, two of the biggest topics in our space right now, it's AI and insurance, and we've decided to bring them both together. So really looking forward to this one, and I think to kick things off, I'd love to introduce you to the experts. Me, of course, just a moderator, and so very much enjoy learning from the experts that we get onto these community fireside chats. This is the first community fireside chat in APAC. This is going to be a series that we run on a monthly or quarterly basis. The whole idea is to bring experts like Tom, Tim, Katrina on together in discussion to deliver thought leadership and value to our MSP community. So watch out for the series, and this is the first one, and we're kicking things off with a bang, I think, particularly with this topic. So we'll jump into introductions. So Tom, mate, please introduce yourself and a little bit about your background and All IT.
For sure, me. I'm Tom Buckley from All IT. I'm the CEO, and we've been in business for over 20 years. Operate on the Eastern Seaboard, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and a lot of regional areas in between, and offer quite a solid security slant to our offerings in a very structured way, and do that to manage clients across that Eastern Seaboard to mostly medium-sized businesses in those areas, and a few small businesses in some regional areas. But that's us, and looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Tim?
Thanks, Reece. Thanks, Tom. Tim Stephinson from SherpaTech. So we're an insurance broker that specialises in tech and IT. So we're basically representative. We represent our customers, predominantly MSPs and tech providers, to the insurance market. So we deal with wonderful underwriters like Katrina at Emergence and others to find products that are suitable for MSPs and to ensure that they have the right coverage levels as well. We're Australia-wide, and I'm based in Sydney.
Thanks, Tim. And good segue into Katrina.
Thank you. I'm Katrina Hickson from Emergence Insurance. So I head up the distribution team across Australia and New Zealand. We are a specialist cyber insurer here in the market, and my role and the role of my team is working with insurance brokers like Tim to produce our product to support clients in that space.
Awesome. Well, guys, I really appreciate you being here. To the audience, guys, please feel free to be interactive. So if you do have any questions, please chuck them in the chat or Q&A, and we'll look to answer those. For those of you that are watching this on demand, if you have any questions of any of us that we don't answer in the webinar today, you can reach out to us individually, and we'll obviously make sure we share those details with you all. So guys, like I said, I'm very much looking forward to this discussion, and I think to kick things off, we'd like to kind of keep it broad in terms of the first question, just to open things up. So the threat landscape over the last 12 months, 24 months, 36 months is evolving pretty drastically, I would suggest, and I think insurance is a component of that, and is trying to keep up with that landscape. So it would be good, and perhaps Tim, to start with you. What are some of the key trends or changes that you've seen in that cyber insurance space over the past 12 to 36 months?
Yeah, so the big one for me is the advancement of underwriters investing in their own technology. So everyone's probably familiar with the forms and documents that you get to place insurance. But underwriters like Emergence and others are now investing in a lot more sophisticated scanning and assessment tools. So we're typically finding that when we take risk or businesses to the market that have, very good security postures or invested in getting the right controls in place in advance, it's a very quick approval process. And, we used to find a couple of years ago, insurance was very hard to get for cyber insurance. Now we find it very easy because businesses can be understood much quicker. These tools can be used to assess risk in a much more understood way. And we're finding the exposures are much better understood by providers like Emergence as well. So we can have really good conversations with them about things that technology providers or MSPs have done in advance, and that's leading to better premiums, it's leading to wider coverage, and also faster responses. The reason this has been done by underwriters is to save them money, and they obviously don't need to pay out more than they are required to. So they're very efficient now in handling claims and dealing with cases. Insurance for us traditionally was a very archaic product. It's been around hundreds of years, but the way that cyber insurance is managed now, it's very different. It's a promise to deliver, not a promise to pay. So we find that I stole the phrase from one of the case managers actually at Emergence, where he referred to the incident response team as the Avengers. And it really resonated with me because I love my Marvel movies, and the team that showed up when something goes wrong, their skills are incredible, and they're skills that sometimes sit outside of your typical managed service provider as well. I digress a bit there, but that's what I'm seeing.
Well, that's really interesting, and I suppose Katrina, to extend the question to you and expand a little bit, is that kind of introduction of IR and that capability to respond to those incidents, has that been a big uplift that you've seen in the past sort of few months?
Yeah, I think the use of AI and machine learning to help assess cyber risks is becoming a lot more prevalent, and it's also helping with the accuracy. It gives us much more of a better understanding of the organisation's risk profile, and also analysing like real-time data such as network vulnerabilities and the like. Another thing that I've noticed is insurers are now moving away from that traditional risk transfer where you're paying out claims after an incident, and now really promoting cyber resilience. So it's about helping the client avoid breaches in the first place. And often you'll see a lot of policies on the market now from a cyber perspective that are actually now including things like vulnerability assessments, real-time monitoring, threat intelligence, and that incident response support that Tim mentioned before as well. And it's becoming more of a proactive tool rather than that reactive policy.
And that's really interesting, and would love to hear from you, Tom, kind of how you see that play in your world as an MSP, kind of sitting in between the customer and the cyber insurance policy, so to speak.
Yeah, so what we're seeing, particularly in the last 6 to 12 months, is a large change. Obviously, probably actually rewind the last 3 to 4 years. We've seen a number of customers and clients come to us, new customers and existing clients, with an interest in the area, because obviously, with a number of the bigger breaches, the smart operators are certainly asking questions, and we're actively, as part of our managed approach, and our relationship managers do that. But another big change in this sort of last 6 to 12 months has been organisations, small and medium, and even right down to contractors that are dealing particularly with multinationals or highly regulated environments, have those suppliers or industries imposing a hell of a lot of regulation and requirement on these businesses. And then that in turn comes to us, and that can be anything from businesses now requiring ISO 27001 certification as a business, a lot of audit and compliance requirements from a lot of the multinationals that, if you were to supply services to them, that they now require. So that's been a big thing. And then that has in turn moved into, okay, well, what insurances does the organisation have in place? That's a question that is asked. And then it starts an entire new question. If they have, so two parts to that. If an organisation has cyber insurance, is they're now starting to say, okay, well, they probably, a lot of businesses have received the questionnaire that it's been mentioned and tick and flick, which, there hasn't been a lot of interest, but the interest in terms of what is on that form and what are we actually provided with from you, as in us, as our service provider, and what are we actually covered for. The interest in that is sometimes imposed from some other areas, as I mentioned, but the interest level is amplified in the last 6 to 12 months, which I think is a really good thing, and it really parlays into what you were saying, Katrina, in that, you know, prevention really, I suppose, is the best medicine, for want of a better term, rather than getting a policy and, you know, just sitting back and relaxing, because, you know, insurance is one thing, but, you know, there's a lot of reputational things. So people are really starting to think about the reputational risk in regards to things as well. So it's rapidly changing, which has been a really interesting dynamic change in particularly the last 6 to 12 months.
And Tom, have you seen the I guess, you know, interest in cyber insurance from your customers then drive additional opportunities and services for you as a provider? And how are you kind of taking advantage of that?
For sure. So I think there's been a large trend in our space, the managed services space, that states that, you know, if you want a certain level of, there's a lot of different maturities in our space and the customer space. So firstly is, you know, from our perspective, we've got a multi-layered approach in terms of applying a cybersecurity baseline and posture to an organisation, and that comes in various flavours and various levels of protection. So, you know, you can't come to an organisation and expect to be, you know, have full coverage to maturity level 3 in the Essential 8, for example, or the CIS controls, and then, you know, for example, audit and compliance that is, you know, a lot of checking of things, and have that for a sort of a stock standard price. So it is an education process. So when clients come to us and they're asking questions, it really, you've got to take the time to educate and say, okay, well, for this level of cyber protection and coverage, you know, the price is X, but it includes this. So you've got to take we're noticing we've got to take clients on that journey, because the range, particularly of providing services and just the sheer manpower. I mean, we'll get into AI and how that is helping in terms of the cost of providing these services. But there is a big range. So, you know, providing a standard sort of level of coverage can be reasonably economical. But if you have a regulatory, as I say, regulatory requirement from government or a supplier, or you need, you know, these added protections, it can get very costly very quickly. And of course, from a person that is, you know, a business owner, they're not experts. You know, they're either experts as an accountant or a lawyer or what have you. So there is education. It's pretty dry stuff. So you've got to take them on that journey. Absolutely.
And it sounds like, Katrina, I think, you know, from an underwriter's perspective, there's this kind of broadening of services and capability that you deliver outside of just that reactive insurance piece. Kind of how are you seeing that play out in the sort of, you know, MSP to client scenario? Oh, I think you're on mute, Katrina.
Trick for young players. Yeah, I think we're seeing more of a hybrid approach and working more in collaboration with MSPs for their end clients as well. And that's the thing, is that there are some services that insurers may offer that the MSP offers, and obviously they're the experts with that insured. So it's more just from a collaboration point of view and trying to fill any gaps that may be present.
And Tim, you must be seeing something similar with, you know, the amount of sort of partners that are reaching out to you guys to.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we take a view that the underwriters are providing these services as value adds. You know, for most people, the MSP is the primary contact for their customers for technology. The reason the underwriters, we feel, offer a lot of these services is because it reduces their risk. And in some cases, there might be a bit of a double up between services an MSP provides and services an underwriter provides. But we always refer to the things that come from an underwriter almost as the last line of defense. So they're doing them because they must be there. And so, you know, if you can sort of look at it with that lens, sometimes underwriters as well offer the ability to connect into tenancies or run scans or even pre-alerts. We don't see that as a replacement for security services that MSPs would be offering, but we see it as a backstop in the event that there's a failure or an exposure that may not have been considered. You know, there are gaps, and that's why insurance is held. So it's an expanding of that sort of philosophy. So, you know, some people Yeah, we don't see that the underwriters are overlapping with the MSPs. We see them as very complementary. And the more that you can use the GRC services that come from the underwriters as well. We've seen that with Emergence. They have a sister business called CyberSuite. With every Emergence policy now, you also get additional CISO style services. So these can be an enhancement, and they can also educate the end customers about areas that they may be deficient in, that they might be not actually paying their MSP for services. So the underwriter or insurance can drive those services back to the MSP in that sense. So yeah, we're all trying to sell this. I think we're all trying to uplift our clients' postures. We're all trying to make sure they're better covered. So coming back to those principles really helps.
I think that's a good point, Tim. I think that I've noticed, particularly new clients coming in, there has been a little bit of an aversion in the MSP landscape to some of these tools and mechanisms put in place, because they feel it might be an encroachment on their territory in terms of the job they do. But I think it's really important that everyone in this sort of, I suppose, ecosystem works together to do that, and that includes people like Huntress as well. That everyone's got an important thing. Even as a business like us, we're very proud of our security baseline, but we are human, and there is a lot of human involvement in this stuff. We've got all the systems in place that could possibly do, but at the end of the day, we're making an enormous amount of change on behalf of our customers and their environments.
Yeah.
And at times that human error comes into play. So those systems and mechanisms as a backstop, that the likes of Emergence and the underwriters are putting in place, we see as a very positive thing. And again, I think that if you're engaging and educating the client in regards to all of these things, don't hide it from the client. I think that's another trend we see with some providers is, well, don't tell the client of, this bad exposure, what have you. Again, I think it's you don't have to be perfect, and that's okay. But the more you include the client in that discussion, I think is a very important thing, and not hide it from them.
So do we expect our AI employees to be perfect?
Let's hope.
So this is one that I've been kicking around with a few other people recently is, when you think about the AI exposures that, any business, not just MSPs or technical providers are sort of dealing with now, we're letting children in some instances, I'll call the AI the children, drive advice out of businesses in some cases. And that's one of the biggest exposures I think that insurance will have to deal with in the next couple of years. And you've got to think about it. First of all, is it a cyber exposure or is it a professional indemnity exposure? And we see a lot of insurance policies built to handle AI, but we don't see a lot of clauses introduced into insurance policies until insurers lose money. And then they start to introduce these clauses or these, I suppose, exclusions or endorsements, they're called in the insurance world. And so I think any business out there that's using AI has to think about how are they mitigating that risk? And if it's a high risk that AI might, you're using AI to deliver a technical result with health implications, scanning for melanomas or doing other things, that you introduce that into your insurance provider's documentation to make sure they're aware and they've provided coverage. It's called staying silent on something if you don't mention it. And if you stay silent, you then increase the chance that you could have a claim that the underwriter may not respond to. So, there's a lot of exposures we don't know how insurance will handle them. There's a lot that we do know how insurance handles. In a cyber policy, they're already built to handle AI losses. That if somebody uses AI to trick someone, the policy behaves the same way as if it was a malicious actor versus an AI actor. But on the other side of the coin with professional indemnity, we haven't really seen some of these things play out yet. So I think just on the AI theme, we've got to really understand what are we trying to cover or what are we trying to address for.
That's a really good segue, Tim. And that AI discussion, I think there's AI is going to be involved in, to your point, attacks. So adversaries using AI to breach our customers. AIs are going to be used internally in our customers' business to drive efficiencies or effectiveness in the delivery of their services to their customers. And also MSPs are going to be using AI, potentially tools that have AI components to help deliver their service to protect their customers. So AI is going to be everywhere.
Yeah.
And it would be good to understand, I guess, from your perspective, Katrina, how do you see underwriters, consider the implications of AI and kind of what they're or how they're evolving, their policies, etc.
Yeah, sure. And to Tim's point, the way in which a cyber policy currently responds is a cyber event, irrespective of whether it's AI driven or whether it's an individual driven event. But I think more broadly, underwriters will need to consider the use of AI to, with threat actors using them to automate large scale cyber attacks, such as phishing campaigns and ransomware and malware. And I think AI driven tools can launch quite highly targeted attacks and also can improve precision and make it a lot harder for businesses to detect them. So I think that's definitely going to be something that will be taken into consideration. And then I guess on the flip side we'd be looking to assess whether the companies have adequate defenses for those kind of AI-powered attacks as well, including advanced threat detection and machine learning. Anomaly detection as well. So I think it's a bit of a hybrid approach. I think it's not something that's new to the considerations that we have, but I think as we see more adoption of AI use in businesses, then we'll start to see those examples and scenarios play out. And to Tim's point, that will obviously potentially alter the way in which we handle it.
And just coming back to you, Tim, in terms of that professional indemnity insurance versus cyber insurance, I'm assuming there's AI implications in both of those, right?
Yeah, definitely. The insurance has been talking about AI for the last 10 years. It's been in there in some instances as exclusions previously, where underwriters for professional indemnity haven't wanted to cover the AI exposure. In the last couple of years, obviously the generative AI that everyone's using in the business sort of falls outside of some of those policies. Sorry, it's included by some of those policies. Those AI exclusions were more around people developing AI products within businesses, whereas now as we consume them more frequently, they're less, I suppose, of an exposure there and more of a business advantage. But the element that I was sort of unpacking is that the difference between professional indemnity and cyber insurance, and professional indemnity being protection for bad advice or perceived bad advice, and you just don't want to let the AI give the bad advice to your customers if it doesn't have the right human in the loop or the right checks and balances that you would put on any junior before they were implementing something for your clients as well. Yeah, I mean, one of the big marketing tools of, some of the ChatGPT or, generative AI models is, it's like a McKinsey 2.0 or a McKinsey, it delivers those reports and those, that framework and thinking for you. But are you comfortable putting your business name or your business recommendations to that unchecked or unbalanced?
I think your reference to AI as a child or to the children is a good reference there. Just because I think AI is not quite where it needs to be to take ownership of some of these things that perhaps people are thinking it is.
I definitely think it'll get there though. Like it is moving very, very fast, and so I think we can start thinking about it as a teenager or as a grown-up more, but building our businesses better equipped to address those, because they get those risks, so they're going to change very, very fast. And so once that that child AI goes to a teenager and a grown-up, it will be much more powerful and much faster. And if you unleash a business operational model now that doesn't consider those future gains, you could be putting yourself out for other exposures.
Well, hopefully the AI gets through those teenage years pretty quickly.
Just another point I wanted to mention as well on that topic is we are seeing the emerging new regulations around the ethical use of AI, particularly the EU's AI Act. And I think that's something that underwriters will consider down the track, as well as those regulations do roll out, as how well companies actually comply to these regulations, and then the potential liabilities if they're not actually complying. So that'll definitely be something for consideration as well from an underwriting perspective.
And just while we're on the AI underwriting piece, Timothy has a question. So Just around, there's a couple of questions there from Timothy. I'll go to the final one first. Around AI exclusions, are we seeing AI exclusions appearing into underwriter policies already? Are they already in there? Are we seeing a trend of more of those AI exclusions being put in place? Like, can you talk to that, Tim and Katrina, perhaps?
Yeah, I've seen it with some historic PI policies. So the thing you've got to understand with an insurance policy is the wording or the legal framework that an insurance policy is built on is typically written every 4 to 6 years. They're quite expensive documents to produce. And so the landscape that was around 4 years ago is very different to where it is now. One underwriter jumps to mind where it's top of their exclusion list, where they say their appetite isn't for businesses doing AI work. They don't do gambling, they don't do adult services, but it fell onto that list previously. Now, as we're seeing wordings change, I've seen that remove, because now it's more common that people are doing those activities. But just because of the cycle of insurance is slower than the cycle of technology, we do see a mismatch between policies that might have been written or this year versus 4 years ago. And so that's then about us finding or selecting the right policy for the right client, and making sure it's fit for purpose. But the good thing with the insurance market is it's actually very large. There's a lot of providers, there's a lot of competition, and typically we can find homes for all natures of risk. Sometimes it just takes a little bit longer and requires more detailed conversations.
And I'll kind of go into the underwriter's use of AI in a second, but Tim did make a good point that he perhaps feels that he needs better or more communication with underwriters, because I think a couple of his customers are on Emergence, but had no idea about the GRC tools and the additional capabilities that you guys provide. So I think, again, that open ecosystem model of leveraging capability across the providers that we use as MSPs, I think is pretty critical. Just on the use of AI by underwriters. Now, it seems there's been, according to the question here, some inconsistencies perhaps around premiums and calculation of premiums. And the question is, do underwriters use AI or kind of automated tools to work out these premiums, or is there a bit more behind the scenes detail that goes in to kind of put these premiums out there?
Yeah, so I guess from our perspective, they're individuals that will underwrite the particular transactions. We do have like an online portal that brokers are able to populate our risk information, and we've got some, risk matrix and pricing matrix associated with those responses. From an AI perspective, there are other markets that are utilising AI to assist with the underwriting decision process and the pricing process. And I think it's one of those things that needs to be handled quite in collaboration with an individual decision-making process or the individual underwriting process, because it can provide some false negatives or false positives as well, depending on the situation. So it's one thing to use the AI to make the decision, but it's another thing to actually understand the profile of that particular business, and not just the profile of that business, but also how they handle their risk profile, what their behaviours are, and what their tolerance levels is as well. And I think that really also goes a long way, that you can't facilitate out of these sort of AI tools.
Reece, to that point as well, one of the big bits of advice we always give our customers is don't be limited by what the broker asks you. If you're doing things over and above risk controls, you have good policies and procedures and frameworks, make sure you share that with your broker to share with the underwriter, because the more information or the better your business looks, the more that individual who's on the other side, there can assess it manually and make considerations or controls and price adjustments as well. Where I referred to that exclusion list, for example, gambling is a big one, but I have a number of clients that do gambling networks and ecosystems that are okay and accepted, because we've explained the controls and the processes that they put in place, so then they do get accepted by those insurers. But don't just tick and flick the forms and expect somebody to come back and want the risk. You've kind of got to present it well and show that it's considered. So, yeah.
That's a really good point, and perhaps and Tom, perhaps you can speak to this as well. But I think MSPs perhaps in that scenario might be too frightened or concerned with oversharing in terms of the controls and policies that they do have in place. Tom, just kind of coming back to the AI piece and obviously the increased desire to have AI in our business to drive efficiencies or whatever it is. Like, what are you trying to, the discussions you're having with your customers, how are you trying to guide them through this AI journey and where it fits, where it doesn't, and some of the considerations that they need to make from a risk perspective?
Yeah, so looking at it from a risk perspective, we take a relatively practical approach on the things that we can control. So I think that in regards to risk around what AI can do from a cyber breach perspective is still very early days, and I don't think until we unfortunately see some of the breaches and the ramifications they have and how it's done, can the market really respond? And that is from an insurance perspective, from an underwriter's perspective, and of course ours on how we proactively protect. So what are the things? So that's largely an unknown because it's yet to really occur in a large scale way. But there is some things that we are concerned about from a practical perspective that we are having a lot of conversations with clients about. So we're seeing a lot of buzz around, general, AI in general in terms of Copilot and the general AIs, and I think their effectiveness of use in a large scale way in a business is still somewhat limited. But where we are seeing the use of AI gaining big traction is in very particular use cases. So there's a number of organisations that are coming out for AI for various things, and I'll give you some examples. AI for booking platforms for restaurants. We're seeing business process automation in law firms and property companies and things like that. So they're specialist AI. They're leveraging probably the big tools, but they certainly have a custom flavour. And some of the conversations we're having is, okay, well, where, obviously it's great and people go into these things because they see the efficiency gain very quickly, and we're seeing that in some of these custom products. But they're heading into it a little bit too quickly. So we're trying to not necessarily put the brakes on, but at least have a conversation with these providers and say, okay, well, where is the risk and where is your data heading? And I'll give you a good example. There's a big risk that I perceive in terms of an organisation collects customer information and then they're utilising tools, and this doesn't even apply to AI, but a number of third-party tools that business uses, whether they're CRMs or these AI booking platforms and the business optimization companies. So a customer hands their information over, and then that business hands that information over to a third party, unbeknownst to the end consumer. And the business that is doing this really needs to ask the question about the protections put in place when they're dealing with this AI and the information that they're handing over. Where is the data being held? How is it being secured in transit and all these sorts of things? And I think it's the responsibility of the MSP to really ask these questions and unpack that, because they're questions that should be asked and can be controlled. And, we all go through the terms and conditions of these organisations as business owners and employees. We quickly get to the bottom as quickly as we can to hit the accept button before we can sign up and get these tools into place. And I think that we're suggesting that you don't do that. You at least, engage someone like us to look at this and see where that risk is. So that's a big, that's something that you can control. The ramifications of the AI and it getting in the wrong hands, as I say, it's remained to be seen how bad it can be. I think there's some instances of it occurring in certain industries, but that's one area that we highly recommend our clients and partners look at because I think it's really important. And of course, if you've done your due diligence and you've asked the question and there is a breach occurred, you have a regulatory requirement from a government perspective and there's changes afoot in regards to a lot of policy for small and medium organisations in the Privacy Act and other areas of government policy for businesses to notify. You can, utilise and leverage the capacity that the insurers have, and people like Tim and all that sort of, again, ecosystem that can support you. and you can, with some confidence, say, okay, well, we've had this breach, but we did go through this long due diligence process and we did ask the questions and what have you. If you haven't done any of that, I think you've got financial risk, you've got all sorts of risk, but you ultimately the reputational risk is something that can fold a business.
That poses an interesting question then, particularly in that scenario, perhaps where you're taking as the end customer some client data, you're then leveraging AI, or to your point, it could just be a third-party tool of some sort. There's a breach somewhere in that supply chain, and that client data gets leaked. From an insurance or protection perspective, where does who's
that's a great question, isn't it, Reece? Like, whose data is it and whose responsibility is it?
Yeah.
And I've had a couple of claims I've been across recently where I can't answer that. And so we've gone to the underwriters and asked the question. And in some cases, the underwriters then refer to the legal professionals to actually, demark this is this responsibility of this policy and this is this responsibility of that policy. I had a unique situation pre a claim with a health provider that was doing data for a state health department, and basically the state health department was trying to put the organisation on the hook for 20 million customer records. And through work with Emergence at the time, we broke out what was the client's responsibility and what was their customer's responsibility. And the reason for that was if they had to insure for 20 million records, the premium was astronomical. But we were able to break down with the insurer and demark and say, actually, the cloud co-hosted stuff is both our responsibility, but the on-prem stuff is clearly not the provider's responsibility. It's actually the state health department's responsibility. And so that enabled them to contract ahead of time to be very clear on whose data is whose responsibility before there's a breach. And I think that's a great way to sometimes use the underwriters as a bit of an arbitrator before an event to actually, if you can't get insurance for it, chances are it's not covered. But if you can get insurance for it, well, then you can comfortably contract for that. So, that's kind of a way that we use underwriters to help resolve that before it's an issue. If you do have an issue and that hasn't been resolved, the best scenario is both parties hold cyber insurance and you can trigger those policies. And the lawyers then work for the insured for their best interest. This is something that some people don't realise. The lawyers that respond when a policy responds don't work for Emergence. They're not working in Emergence's best interest. They're working in the client's best interest. And that's something that sounds a bit basic, but sometimes people don't realise that. Sometimes people think the lawyers are there trying to get out of the claim. And in our experience, any claim we've been involved in has always been valid and paid and managed really well. So to dispel some of those insurance myths of, well, they never pay. I hear that one thrown around all the time. And it's definitely not the case in our experience.
And anything to add to that, Katrina?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting topic, and I think supply chain attacks or supply chain risk is quite one top of mind. You think of the malicious attacks like SolarWinds and Kaseya, and then the non-malicious ones like CrowdStrike outage as well. Yep. Insurers are now placing more emphasis on coverage around what that looks like for third-party risks, and businesses really need to consider, I guess, how robust their risk management and vendor management process is. I think we'll start to see a lot more emphasis on that supply chain risk from a cyber insurance space.
So would you say, in terms of for a partner, an MSP, thinking about cyber insurance for themselves, thinking about cyber insurance for their customers, that actually proactive engagement with an underwriter or through a broker like yourself, Tim, to really understand who needs cyber insurance for what is pretty critical in terms of delivering an outcome for their customer?
Definitely. I mean, one of the things we ask our customers, when we're doing an onboarding is, what are your big three risks, or what are the events that scare you? And it's really interesting when businesses say, like all IT, answer those questions, and sometimes the answers surprise you. And, we can then use that to go to underwriters or go to the market and say, we're trying to cover these risks off. They're not always consistent. The big ones are data breaches and ransomware events and those ones. But sometimes there's nuanced risk that comes from unique customer sets as well. And so if we can unpack that properly, an example I gave at a roundtable a little while ago where there was some very large customers were saying, well, we just write it off on we take our balance sheet and we use that to cover our cyber exposure. I was basically talking to them about ways that they can reduce the cost by having very large excesses to still access the panels of those specialists to reduce the cost of that cyber insurance program. So if you kind of figure out what are you trying to achieve with cyber insurance, you can then craft the right policies and programs, and address the needs of the business, not just tick a box and get cyber insurance, but deliver a policy that really works well with their incident response plan as well. The insurers have amazing incident response plans, but sometimes you might want your own internal plans to override some of that. Sometimes you need to validate that it is a notifiable breach before you call the insurers, and those things are really important to step out there as well. So the due diligence inbound getting insurance can sometimes discover all of those elements as well. So yeah.
And Tom, from your perspective, is that something in terms of that proactive engagement, within that ecosystem, is that something that an MSP can monetize, or is it more a risk reduction exercise for the partners, do you think?
I think that, again, I keep saying education, but it's a long journey in order to monetize that. So it's a long journey of education in terms of setting the expectations around the services that you provide. I think as MSPs, a lot of MSPs fall into the trap that they need some sort of a security product, and then all of these things are changing, and then all of these services just kept getting lumped into their standard, their package, and then all of a sudden, this space is changing rapidly, and they're providing, in terms of hours spent or products used to service, it's just gone way over very quickly, and this can occur very quickly. And if you're not tracking that, it become a very big cost to the business. So how do you change that? Again, as I say, through education with the client and the setting of expectations around the services that you provide and what is included. You can then, through that education, understand that, okay, well, you are receiving a service from us, as your MSP, for these services. But if you acquire X, Y, and Z, then these are the costs associated with it. And I think we take the perspective that having very frank and open and transparent conversations is the best method with clients. This doesn't need to be sort of smoke and mirrors to work out what is and isn't included and all those sorts of things, but they can be uncomfortable conversations with clients. Generally, as MSPs, everyone is out to service the customer the very best they can with the resources they have. And it's not a matter of ripping clients off. It's not a matter of, any of those things. It's just a matter of having frank conversations around what you do provide and what's not included. And they, at the end of the day, I think that if you're having those conversations, they're then looking at it a risk from their perspective. Do they take on the services that you're recommending, or don't they? And that's a risk. Again, it's like insurance. What level of coverage do you want, and what's your excess? They're decisions that the business owner we shouldn't be making them for the client by staying silent.
Yeah.
If they're aware, then that's their decision and the options given to them.
We definitely see it with the more mature MSPs. They don't see that they have to do everything for the customer. They're more inclined to be an advisor in some instances, say, hey, look, we might do this 50% of services, but if we see a gap or a risk in your program, they'll advise them to say, go talk to a good GRC supplier or talk to a specific implementer, or, actually carve out those areas. And we actually see that as a great way for an MSP to de-risk its offering as well. When we look at legal contracts as well, it's really important to call out what you do for a customer, but also be very specific about what you're not doing for them, and that they don't perceive that you're the only port of call for those services. I think that's a good protection for professional indemnity as well, to show that if they're not, that you're not that one-stop shop for everything, and that they can get these other GRC services from other providers as well, and you recommend that to them. A
good point to add to that, Tim, is that we're seeing a large trend, particularly in medium-sized organisations, and I know the definition of that is a little grey, but for medium-sized organisations that have their own internal IT department, we are firstly seeing a trend away from having dedicated IT departments to having a hybrid approach with MSPs or implementing MSPs largely. And some of the reason for that is because, to Tim's point, the mature MSPs can offer a really trusted panel of providers, whether that's insurance or specialist security. The MSP, sometimes, they might provide 50-60% of the service, but they have a panel that working very closely. And again, the ecosystem is a bit of a corny term, but it's really, really important that everyone's sort of working in harmony to provide the services. You can't be everything to everyone, and I think if you do, there's an inherent risk to that, unless you're a very large MSP that, in the many hundreds of employees that have specialised departments, and I'm even seeing those MSPs break out and use specialist providers, whether that's ISO implementation, as Tim mentioned, or other areas. So I think there's advantage in that, and again, being transparent with the client, and that's okay.
Yeah, I lean on that a lot as well. If I have an end customer risk that I'm taking to a provider like Emergence, I love to share that they've got a professional IT organisation managing their infrastructure, plus they've then looked at other third-party consultants, or they have those services in-house. Because we then find we get a much more mature conversation, with the underwriter at Emergence or others, when we articulate all of that. So yeah, back to my transparency point.
Yeah, what's also interesting, I think, tying back to the that open ecosystem piece that we keep talking about. When I worked at an MSP, decade ago or so, and speaking to an IT manager, he was explaining to me that his role has evolved from fixing stuff, hopefully not breaking stuff, fixing stuff, to procuring services from external providers to deliver a service to his internal company to make it run. It sounds like MSPs need to start thinking in that mindset that they're not just the people going around fixing things, but they're procuring services from that ecosystem, including underwriters and brokers, to deliver an outcome for their customers.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more with that, and I think that it's only going to change more with the AI piece. You're becoming a trusted advisor and a consultant around all of these things. I mean, there's still we're probably talking, getting into the medium-sized businesses and above, and MSPs that service that market. There's still very much, that reactionary service, and there always will be. But for MSPs that want to grow into that space and have structured solutions, becoming an advisor to those clients around not only risk and all these sorts of things, but how businesses can run more efficiently and all those sorts of, that component as well. So it's, you see the MSPs that are expanding at rapid rates, certainly heading in that direction, rather than the reactionary approach, which is very much solely around the tech, and having the MSP involved in important conversations within these businesses. And sometimes you've got to be, for organisations that are not used to it, you've got to inject yourself into those conversations more often than not, because it's not, they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, we see insurance as a great way to inject yourself into those conversations, because they come to you to complete their forms. It's a great consulting piece to be able to say, we can't just tick and flick these forms. We actually have to step you through, MFA as a basic example. We provide MFA on these 3 platforms, but we don't manage your CRM. We don't manage your accounting software. You need to go and verify that all of those platforms are engaged and meet those requirements, because quite often the forms aren't granular enough to actually reconcile all those different areas. But that's a great consulting opportunity.
And that's another good segue, Tim. You've been doing good with the segues today. Just to one of Tim's questions, just around actually filling in those insurance forms. His question was around, is it for an MSP, should they not be filling in those cyber insurance forms, but providing their own document of?
Absolutely, don't fill them in. We cannot say this enough. To use the basic example like MFA, if you're an MSP and you check the operating systems that you provide for your customer and you tick MFA, send that back to them, and then they submit it to their broker, who then sends it to Emergence, and then they have a claim, and then it turns out that the claim came from their CRM or their 365, so some area outside of the MSP's responsibility. The customer could have a valid claim on the professional indemnity part of the policy to say, you gave me advice that was wrong, and they could draw you into a claim. It might be even, professional advice is the protection for bad advice or perceived bad advice, and that perceived bad advice could be confused there. So, we very much advocate not completing those forms for that sort of granular reason, and stepping the customer through that it's their data and it's their responsibility. And the vendors that they manage, they have a lot of vendors that always sit outside of the MSP contract as well. We've done an MFA checklist for our customers to sort of help them get across that. MFA is such a basic one, but if you can apply that example to many other technology platforms that exist within the business that actually sit across that form, you start to go, it dials the customer in that this is their responsibility as well. So, Katrina, I don't know if you thoughts on that as well.
Just really quickly on that perspective, obviously the client is coming to you to gain some validity around the protections put in place. So as an MSP, I feel that we can't not answer questions. But the way we attack it is for managed clients is we provide two answers to, for example, the MFA question. We provide the history of protection on the organisation to provide some validation that the protections have been put in place historically, and we provide some validation around the controls and policies that are put in place to do that moving forward. We're not suggesting that for the platforms that we manage on behalf of the customers. So rather than saying, yes, they're covered, in worst case on that sort of a blanket to every platform, or, if you're a little bit more and you say yes to 365, well, that's great and all, but how are you going to, as an MSP, cover that, a junior engineer or someone accidentally, again, human error, has turned the MFA policy off or left someone in an exclusion group or something like that. So they're the way. I'm not sure whether from a risk perspective we validated that with, in a legal sense, so that we're that's probably the best level of protection and probably be best answered by Katrina, whether that's appropriate. But we're providing that historical context and record, and suggesting they're the controls and mechanisms put in place moving forward.
Yeah, it's really good comments. And I think one thing that we like to emphasise is if there is any, confusion, or if the insured isn't sure about all the protections in place, and to Tim and Tom's point, there would be things that the MSP handles that they can give the advice on what is in place and what isn't in place, and whether that is for all the other systems or programs, then definitely erring on the side of caution when completing those proposal forms. So I think that's going to give you the best outcome potentially when there is a claim scenario. And a lot of the times, most insurers will still offer insurance depending on the responses, yes or no, to those questions. So just considering, how you want to respond to that, and making sure that you've got, that comfort in what you're providing is either accurate, or if it's not, err on the side of caution and potentially select no.
So, to summarise, don't just tick the box. Don't just tick the box.
Absolutely.
It's never as simple as that.
Yeah. And I'm sure most partners aren't doing that, but their customers could be. So certainly it's a conversation to have with their customers on that. So guys, I'm mindful of time. We've got 5 or so minutes left. I want to firstly make sure I thank the three of you for coming on, because I think you've shared untold knowledge bombs today. It's been really good, and I think MSPs, those that are watching live and on demand, will take a lot of value from some of the considerations and advice that you've shared. I also want to, before we go to final Q&A with Sean, actually we'll answer this question first. Is providing so I have no idea what this acronym means. WISP, W-I-S-P, is that adequate? And Tim or Katrina, I'm hoping you know what that is and can answer that question.
Have you got an explanation? What is a WISP? I'll go first. The acronym.
The question is providing a WISP adequate? WISP. So I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it was.
No.
Sean, you might need to provide a bit of clarification there, please, to your question. You're making us all feel stupid here. No, I'm only joking. But before Sean does provide a bit of clarity around there, guys, what are your written information security plan? There you go. There you go. That makes a lot of sense.
We're an industry full of acronyms.
I love
Too many acronyms.
Too many
acronyms.
Yeah, I mean, having any sort of preparation is absolutely critical. Particularly when we talk about incident response plans and those sort of things, and acting when there's a crisis happening. Whether just having a plan is adequate, I probably would disagree. I think having a plan, but also making sure that everyone in the business is aware of the plan, test the plan, review the plan. I think there's a lot of other elements that need to go into not just having a plan.
Yeah, I mean, tabletop exercises are really important to be able to test those plans as well. Even very basic plans in very small organisations, to have some steps up on the board for who's to contact, who's to make that decision, who is the insurer, who is the broker. I heard a great few tips from a seminar I was at recently. You need to have in the bottom drawer the 5 or 10 pieces of information that you need at your fingertips during a breach. A backed up copy of your customer database that is always accessible, the communications list. You can talk to your broker about what would be required in the event of a claim, or what the lawyers will ask for as that first communication step. And so just preempting some of those things, they're quite basic, but having them at your fingertips ready to go, and having the plan on the wall, having everyone aware of it and talking about it regularly. Chances are a claim or a breach will happen on a weekend or a public holiday or over the Christmas period, and people's phones are off, people are non-contactable. So in the event you can't get the seniors or the manager, what do you do? And making sure the entire organisation is across those steps, I think, is really important.
I'll just extend. Sorry, Tim.
Just
extend that to boards. We do quite a bit of work in terms of full work for not-for-profits and for again medium-sized listed organisations that don't necessarily have a CTO. Is around, and there's, I will add, which should be explored, is the responsibilities of directors of boards that are coming into place under the Corporations Act. Which is changing in a big way, but also just education from a board perspective of what occurs when these things happen or potentially happen. And again, the tabletop exercises at a board perspective, again, it comes back to education. Boards are generally constituted by the fact they have varying skill levels in varying skills in varying areas, to make up a really strong board. And not everyone in that board consists of strong cyber knowledge. So again, taking that process through, we're seeing that as a really big requirement, and keeping leadership teams and managements accountable in the right areas in regards to their response should something like this occur, and not going through the process, because there is a lot of responsibility. It's not the responsibility just of leadership and the organisation to do this. There is a responsibility around the board to keep the organisation accountable during a time of crisis, and doing that on the fly. We have seen this. Doing that on the fly during a time of breach is not the time to be doing it.
Just one point on that. Policies like Emergence have a 24-hour or 48-hour in some instances, sort of a no-claim style advice period. So they want you to call them straight away. They want to jump in. They don't want you to sit on the breach. They do that so they can get in early and actually reduce their costs. But if it turns out to be false, there's no issues. It doesn't affect you and your future premiums. So having a culture of reporting is really important as well, because if they can answer 3 false inquiries and then deal with the real one, your policy is better structured. So just as a takeaway, don't be afraid to call the insurer.
Yeah, and I think to your points as well, I think those tabletop exercises are invaluable. We do them for incident response to our partners and sometimes their customers, and the chaos that ensues in just a game essentially exercise is very eye-opening, I think, for the customer and for the partner. So yeah, couldn't recommend those tabletop exercises enough. So guys, look, we've come up to time. We've kept you, all three of you, for far too long. Really appreciate your time. Before we go, I would like to make sure that if, partners live or on demand that are watching this want to reach out for some advice or just to engage with you guys, where can they find you?
Find us on LinkedIn. I'm always I'm always there. I love a chat. Send us a message or reach out to any of the other partners on the call here. We can pass our details around.
So it sounds like LinkedIn across the board.
100%.
LinkedIn, yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, Katrina, Tim, Tom, really appreciate you guys. It's been excellent. Like I said, knowledge bombs for the last hour. I think, whoever watches this is going to get a lot of value from it. So really appreciate it. And for those that were live and asking questions, appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thanks, Reece.
Thank you.
Tom.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.